Welcome back to the Regenerative Renegade podcast. As you know, these are the stories of the regenerative renegades and their journey and what brings them to us. And today I'm really excited to be talking with Patrice Bailey, Minnesota Department of Ag, Assistant Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. His background and bio: Patrice Bailey was appointed to the position of Assistant Commissioner in June 2019. Bailey oversees outreach, agricultural marketing and development, dairy and meat inspection, and food and feed safety for the MDA. Bailey, a native of Harlem, New York City, all the way here to Minnesota.
All the way down.
Yeah, that's amazing. He holds a BS in agriculture education from Prairie View A&M University in Texas, has a master's degree in agriculture from Iowa State University. He has served the Twin Cities in several positions, with his first position at the College of Food and Agricultural and Natural Resources Sciences. Bailey, in previous positions, focused on bridging gaps within the underrepresented communities of color to various available resources and advocating for them legislatively at the state capitol. Bailey was instrumental in creating the Emerging Farmers Working Group and the Emerging Farmer Office, which is the first office in the nation that has an office dedicated to helping emerging farmers. Welcome, Patrice. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Patrice,
Love to be here.
Patrice always has a smile on his face. He's been to the farm a few times and he visit us, and he's always got a smile. He's got an upbeat attitude, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. He's already smiling and laughing.
I love it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Patrice, I'd like to start with your journey.
Yeah.
I mentioned you're from Harlem. You're here in Minnesota serving in Minnesota Department of Ag, and you seem to have a genuine interest in regenerative agriculture, and been showing up here and asking questions and learning and participating and engaging. So if you could go back and tell us how you got here, how your journey got you here, and your interests in what you're doing today.
Growing up as a city kid, in the heart of Harlem is a lot of fun. But as I think about it and reflect on it, seeing agriculture wasn't something that we were privy to, other than what you saw on television, and even that was stereotypical of farming, but you didn't see yourself reflected in farming, so you just didn't see it as a vocation.
Yeah.
So
a lot of old white guys, right?
Old white guys in bib overalls.
Yep.
A lot of Patrice Farm commercial type of situations.
Seed corn cap.
John Deere hat, just acronyms. You like, what does that mean? So almost as if it was the Beverly Hillbillies. It was as far to agriculture that I thought was like, wow. So everyone's driving on a tractor, and you see
and they look like that.
They look like that.
Yeah.
With a puddle of oil that sort of dribbled up from the ground, and you said, "Wow, that's agriculture." But it wasn't until my senior year, is the summer, sort of the second half, 6 months left to graduate. And unfortunately for me, I grew up in Harlem, but I went to school in the Village. So in the mornings, I would see the Apollo.
What's the Village?
So the Village would be the Tribeca area, the area where the meat district used to be.
Yeah.
So where the World Trade Center is, where is where the Village is.
Okay.
And so
is that the old kind of meat district?
It's the old meat district.
Now it's cool restaurants and stuff.
Cool restaurants is called the Highland. The Highlander. So they have a walking path, where the meat district used to be.
Okay.
So people could see sort of agroponics in this full pleasure.
Okay.
But it wasn't until that senior year, and my mom and I were having a conversation one Saturday morning, and she said, "Well, 6 months left. You must be excited. What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to law school." And she said, "Law school? Why would you do that? There's too many lawyers. Why don't you do something where you could feed yourself?" And I said, "Well, I don't even know what that would be. I just feed myself when I'm done, after work." And she said, "No, do agriculture."
Hmm.
And it was this awkward pause, and I said, "Mom, there's no farmers that look like us, other than what's in the history book." She says, "Bigger than that." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And she said, of course you have George Washington Carver, and you have all these other scientists, and that have had these impacts into agriculture, but you could do something where you could do it worldwide and you could do it every day. And I just couldn't see it.
Where did she get that vision from?
I don't know. She was, the interesting thing about my mom is that she was what they call a granny midwife.
Okay.
And these are the midwives that sort of have prominence in the South.
Okay.
And although she wasn't born in the South, she was born in Camden, New Jersey. She was one of those master midwives, and her time as being a midwife, she had birthed about 6,000 babies over a 30-year career.
Oh my gosh!
And many of those have been in Harlem, but she traveled the world to deliver babies and do education around maternal health and paternal health. And she even delivered Nelson Mandela's daughter's baby ago.
So is it safe to say that because of her exposure to many different people, that she saw how you could have an impact, and then she was like, I want you to do something bigger?
Well, she was always, I would say, more of a historian.
Okay.
Not just with midwifery, but she was a nurse. She was an RN. That's what she started out as, and so she took the RN piece plus the midwifery piece and started doing birthing.
Wow! But what a pioneer! What a pioneer! She's like gathering these women's days in Harlem 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
She's a renegade.
Yeah, she was around that time of not the Harlem Renaissance of what it used to be, but the Harlem Renaissance of the 70s, 60s, 70s, where, it was, Black is beautiful were the slogans, and, there was a certain pride. And so she was sort of in that era.
Cool.
Growing up in 42, that's sort of the greatest generation.
Yep.
With our parents. And so, this conversation just had come out of the blue. And
so what'd you think then at that time?
I said agriculture. I don't think I can farm. That's just not, I don't want to get dirty and be in the tractor. I don't even know how to drive a tractor.
Yeah.
At the time.
Don't know the first thing about it.
Don't know the first thing. She said, just trust me. If it doesn't work out, give it a year, and then go to law school. And so, a year later, or let's say 6 months later, I found myself deciding to go to Prairie View A&M University. This was in Prairie View, Texas. Never been there in my life. I've been to Houston, but never been to Prairie View. And Prairie View happens to be about 45 minutes outside of Houston on your way up to College Station, where Texas A&M is.
Yeah, the main campus.
The main campus. So this is a part of the Texas A&M system, but it's historically Black college and university.
Okay.
So I find myself there. Greyhound bus said, okay, we're at Prairie View, and it was just a highway. And,
oh, no.
And the guy was like,
get out.
Prairie View is 5 miles that way. Oh. So I had my suitcases, and I said, I'm from New York. I put my headphones on, and I just started walking. And, cars are going by, students, laughing, hey, I have a car, and,
Oh, my God.
So I finally get to the campus, and...
So no one gave you a ride? You walked the whole 5 miles?
I just hoofed it.
Wow.
But that was what I was used to, being in a walking culture in New York. So I went down there, and I finally got to the campus, and I found my dorm, and, I was good. And then I still was sort of apprehensive about my classes and, what would I study. And I finally had met who my advisor would be, Dr. Freddie Richards.
Okay.
And Dr. Freddie Richards, he was sort of, someone who had friends in the Clinton administration. And he said, hey, we're going to take a trip to Chicago, and it's at the which is now the McCormick Center, But he said, we're going to take a trip to Chicago and we're going to, we're going to kind of see what agriculture is at a food show. I said, okay, fine. As we are approaching the McCormick Center, I never saw Secret Service before, but it was Dan Glickman at the time was the USDA secretary.
Okay.
And so he introduces me. Said, "Well, this is one of my students." And I said, "Oh, okay." I didn't know what that was. But when I walked into this huge complex, first thing I see is glacial water. Then I see diet, Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
I see the things that I'm more used to. I walk inside. I look to my right, and I see the Patrice Farm booth. It's huge.
Yeah.
And as I get closer to the booth, I actually see a gentleman that I used to see when I was a kid. Used to be an old gentleman that used to do the Patrice Farm commercials, and he would be in the hammock and he'll talk about how good the food is, and I'm like, that's the guy. And I was so enamored by that this guy was at this food show, and by talking to him, and he was telling me, these are the things you should really look at. And you have to look past the fact that you grew up in the city, but you have to look at what food production can do for you.
Right.
So I spoke to him for about an hour. After that conversation, I was really invested. And ever since that time to where we are today, that was my introduction sort of into FMI, my introduction into, so agriculture is bigger than
food.
Sustainable. Yeah. So now my worldview has changed, and it's actually, widened at this point.
Yeah.
And I started to say, okay,
And do you think, you were put in that place for a reason to have that conversation, right? Like, 'cause that was the turning point right there. That happened, that trip, all of that, right?
All of that. The conversation, the initial epiphany of, you should do this. It wasn't nothing else. She said, she sort of honed in on agriculture, during that time, 6 months before graduation.
Yeah.
And I wind up doing that. I wind up doing my internships with the Forest Service in Moscow, Idaho, during my time at Prairie View. And then when I left Prairie View, I actually did some work in the Virgin Islands.
Ooh.
My dad's side of the family is from St. Thomas.
Okay.
I was beautiful place.
Yeah.
I was in St. Croix, is where the ag department is.
Okay.
And I met the commissioner of agriculture was he was in Texas at the time, and said, whenever you're in VA or the VI, you can go ahead and just look me up. And I took him up on the offer. Okay. So this was now, so this has moved on. I graduated. This is around 98.
Okay.
97, 98. Because because I started Iowa State in January of 1999.
Okay.
So this is that time frame.
Okay.
And so going to grad school at Iowa State is what brought me to the Midwest.
Sure. You got to discover flyover country.
Flyover country, seeing snow for the first time, driving on snow for the first time on I-80 on the way going to Ames.
Yeah.
And then I finally, white knuckling it. I don't know how to drive in snow, but I see people that are turned upside down on their phones and their Lexuses. And I said, wow, I better just keep it at 30 miles an hour. It's going to take me a while. But I finally make it. I'm in Ames.
And you didn't leave.
I didn't leave.
Yeah, you had your chance, but you didn't leave.
But when I got to Iowa State, those 2 years were the best 2 years in my life.
Oh,
because
why?
I learned so much about myself. I learned about what agriculture really was, and those previous internships that I did in Moscow, Idaho, and FMI really prepared me for doing, getting into, the grad work. And then I started doing a little bit of travel. And, I think always the best time when you're in your graduate programs, it's the students that are also in your program that are you're the closest to. And they're sharing their experiences too with USAID and all these other different places. But that really was the inception of getting into agriculture and loving it. But, also getting the chance to be able to say, my mom told me this 20 years ago before to go ahead and get into this field. And so fast forward to where we are today, it's really been a blessing.
All right. So now, you go to Texas, you go to Iowa, now you're in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And, when you're bringing up this, it's amazing. All right. So, we all hear this. Well, we have a lot more in common than we think.
Yeah.
Let's find the commonalities. Let's not focus on the differences. And so what's going through my mind when you're talking about the resiliency that you needed growing up in Harlem and trying to see the optimistic side.
Yes.
Well, this white kid born right around here, that was my landscape, but we were poor, and we raised our own food, and mom sewed clothes, and but there was a certain resiliency that we had to have every day too, because we knew it was up to us. The work was up to us. The school work was up to us. The kind of survival in a way, you could see it pretty close. And so that same mindset that comes from, I just wish we could bottle that up, that mindset that creates resiliency and allow people to see that commonality that exists for everybody that has their story on what they went through. And here we are, different ends of the earth, ending up at this show. And it was a turning point for me too. FMI was, because I looked around and my eyes were wide open. I was this farm kid from central Minnesota. All of a sudden I'm plopped in here. I'm working for Schwann's and the pizza brands and looking around going, wow, this is a lot more than I thought.
It is.
Yeah. This is big. This is food. Wow. This is agriculture.
It's agriculture. And I also look at it as, these different experiences. How someone that lives in a particular neighborhood, when they never leave their particular neighborhood, they always think that's the biggest place in the world. And then when they leave even 5 miles outside of that zip code, things become foreign. Like, where is this? I've never been here before.
Yep.
But then when they leave that particular state, they leave the country, then it's a completely worldview. Then with that little, box that they were originated from, it's so small, even how people think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about today and what you're doing today. And
of course.
I'm so curious, what your work is.
And that's the other part about this job is that every day is a different day. One day you could be in, sort of the Halleck, Minnesota area, the North Dakota area, sort of tagging along with Minnesota Farmers Union to do some town halls to hear about what people are thinking and feeling about agriculture. And then the next day, you could be talking to some students at the U in St. Paul about careers. And then the next day, you're dealing with legislative situations about tariffs. And
what's a tariff again?
That's they used to say that, which letter kind of looks like, like this and none of the others, the big T for tax, and it's good to be able to talk to people about it's a tax. I mean, every country does it on another country on goods and services. And I think that a lot of people might be a little bit more educated in this generation, but generations before, that wasn't something that we didn't even hear.
No, you didn't know about it. Really?
Tariff. What is that? I know taffy.
Yeah, right.
Candy.
Yeah.
But tariff.
Yeah. True. Well, and there just wasn't as much global trade, you know, so it wasn't as big of a deal. That goes back a ways, but, global trade has really changed in the last 30, 40 years.
It has.
And, how do you level that playing field and how do you make it fair? I mean, I love free markets, but everybody kind of has to play along then and have a free market,
Exactly.
right? And if you don't, well, then what do you do to level that off so that
Yeah.
you're fair, but you're also protecting your constituents, and doing what's best for them. So
Absolutely.
that's a tough balance.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned town halls and
Yeah.
farmers. So can you
Yeah.
give us a pulse of how you see farming, and then how is that changing? And what's the current meaning, not the last 90 minutes, but like the last 5-10 years,
Yeah.
what's the state that
Yeah.
you're hearing on agriculture in this state?
I would actually do it in order
Okay.
as the question. In regards to the town halls, every town hall, I think I did 3 or 4 of them with Minnesota Farmers Union. It was tariffs. Tariffs was sort of the issue of the day. Dairy was the issue of the day. People would talk about, various issues of I lost my job. I'm a federal employee, but I wanted to come to the town hall to listen.
So this is very recent then.
Right. So we did this 2 weeks ago.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So I went up to Moorhead and listened to. It was snowing that day.
Of course.
I'm like, here we go, driving again, like I was going to Iowa State. But then the next day we went to Halleck, and we were at the far north distillery.
Okay.
And it packed everybody in the room and make it look like God, it was like 400 people there. It was probably 40, but in the space. But people are very concerned about what does this mean. We're so close to Canada, and the Canadians that we interact with don't have an issue. And just thinking about what people were saying, I'm looking at, I'm sort of projecting it out to a 10,000 foot level, and saying that not all situations may look this way, but it's not a bad situation if you're looking at all the years that American farmers have been taken advantage of when it comes to trade.
Yeah,
and
like dairy going north, right?
That's right.
Right. Didn't happen.
And when I started in 2019, we had probably about 2,300 dairies. Now we're less than 1,700. So within a 6-year period,
state.
just in Minnesota.
Geez, what percentage is that? Like 25%?
Yeah,
something completely gone.
That could be for a myriad of different reasons. It could be reasons because baby boomers are aging out, and they're like, I don't want to do this anymore, and my children don't want to get into the business, and they decide, hey, why don't we just finally sell and go down to the villages in Florida and retire? I think that's a great place to go. But then, I think it's also just really realizing the overabundance of how costly it is to be a farmer, to do a farm operation of whatever kind, and still be relevant.
Yeah, and be able to earn a living.
And earn a living and still have health insurance.
Yeah.
So I think that, that's also the misnomers that at least someone has to work outside of the house.
Yeah.
To be able to still keep health insurance so that the family could still be able to afford health care.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's just amazing. This house we're sitting in here, the couple bought this 70-acre farm that's adjacent to the farm I grew up on. And they had about 17 dairy cows. And they were able to pay for the farm, build this house, build that barn, 2 kids, and pay for it all. And he did the man did some work as a carpenter, but totally project basis carpenter. He was primarily a farmer. And they were able to make it work. I don't know anyone today that could make it work with 17 cows and 70 acres.
You can't do it.
No, and it's really sad. Yeah. It's really sad. Like, they had a very simple life. They didn't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
but they were able to pay for the land and pay for their house and get their kids through school and have a really decent lifestyle. Very simple, but it's changed so much.
Yeah, the landscape is completely different.
Yeah.
You know, I think in a lot of ways it's almost a corporation
Yeah.
than it is a vocation.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
It's
know.
big. You have to have big scale to make it.
Yeah.
You know, the margins just aren't there. You know, the value of food in dollars and cents is just not there like it was. You know,
And you have to deal with price gouging too.
yeah.
So a lot of times, what you see as value when it comes to, eggs or milk, the price that you would receive as opposed to what it's sold for,
Right.
are just night and day.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a complex market, and government plays a role in that.
Oh, yeah.
On programs and what types of agriculture have safety nets and have subsidies and crop insurance, so how do you view that? The thumb on the scale by government, like,
Yeah, and it really has varied over many decades with different administrations. When it comes to farmers in the 80s, you're dealing with a lot of foreclosures, and then the evolution of the farm advocates over that time frame because of the number of foreclosures that were happening and trying to get people out of the situation, led to a lot of, where we are today in terms of having programs around mental health and, many farmers are dealing with suicide because the stagnation of what's happening within the market and also the margins that they are not getting because of a lot of government overreach.
Yeah.
And so I think that
so you work for the government, and
I work for the government.
and you said government overreach.
Yeah.
So you see it happening,
yeah,
right? Like it.
yeah,
Okay.
It happens a lot. Not so much with eminent domain,
Right.
but eminent domain does play a part.
Okay.
Over the years
Yeah.
of having land, and that's the unique piece about Minnesota of us having the corporate farm law. And what that law would be is to make sure that corporations are not, do not become landowners. So
Okay.
Bill Gates as Bill Gates the person, not Bill Gates the Microsoft person, can buy as much farmland as much as they want, but not as a corporation.
Yeah.
So that gets protected in regards to farmland.
Do you think it matters?
I think it matters to a point, but I think that sometimes in the mindset, farmers are looking at the amount of land that's being bought because of the amount of resources a particular person may have, that is obsessive, because how can I can't even buy 2,000 acres, and this person says I'll take 8,000 over here, and I'll go down to southern Minnesota, by Harmony, and I'll take another 8,000 down there. But the person, Bill Gates, is not the one that's actually physically
Stewarding
there.
the land. Yeah,
Right.
he's not stewarding the land.
That person says, "Here's the money.
Yep.
I need
You go manage it.
You go manage it. It'll be under X amount corporation, whatever you want to name it."
Yeah.
But
Well, that's what I mean by does it matter that if Bill Gates can do it personally or it's done as a corporation,
Well,
there's a way
it does
around
matter.
it. Right? Does it? Okay.
It
Tell me
does
how.
matter if it is a corporation that's buying up the land,
Yeah.
because that's overreach. But
Yeah.
as the person, say if he retired and he said, "I just want to be able to have generational wealth over and over again in land," then he can go ahead and actually buy that land
Yeah.
and do it that way.
Okay.
So I think that a lot of times when I'm talking to farmers, and this is mostly farmers that are sort of in the 5 to 20, 30, even 40 acre spaces. I'm always telling them to look beyond, just okay, you can only get 3 acres, but it's your 3 acres, and these acres have an address, and it has a way that you can be able to grow this into 6 acres and then 15 acres.
Yeah.
You know.
What we see around here with grazing of cattle is the competition for the land and the value of the land is really driven up by those operators that are running corn and soy rotation.
Yeah.
They buy the land. They can pay more for that land than what you can if you're going to graze it, and because of what return you can get off the land. And so that gets difficult because we can't buy the land and graze it and rebuild the soil and pay what the going rate is and get a financial return. You just can't do it. And I wonder about, okay, why is there such an incentive to grow a monoculture crop like that? Do you have any insight into that as to why that is happening?
Well, I think the demand in this case of, growing corn is predicated by the industry, mostly if you're looking at sugar beets, huge, the corporations are employing lots of farmers to grow it because it's profitable. It's a fast return, but you're thinking about sugar, in northwest Minnesota. I mean, that is
the Red River Valley.
That's it.
Yeah.
And for Minnesota as a whole, we actually grow 8 million bushels of corn every year, and that's a lot of land. If you're thinking about someone that's doing row cropping, or they're doing something along the lines of very small scale planting. If you're an organic farmer, the scales are different. But I think, it's also predicated by the demand, from the market as to what people decide to grow, whether they rotate it or whether they say, well, I'm just going to stay sugar beets because, I can feed my family. And so forth.
So you think it's market driven, but what about the government's thumb on the scale as far as crop insurance and subsidy floor pricing and all that? Doesn't that provide an incentive as well from your view?
It really depends on the farmer and the operation, because not a lot of people can afford crop insurance. Or maybe they just don't know that they need these certain insurances in order to, to be safe. And I think, information becomes a huge barrier when it comes to what should I have on my farm once I get the farm and I'm actually setting things up. And they always forget, oftentimes, not to incorporate crop insurance, so if something does happen, it's a total loss. But I think, a lot of the subsidies isn't for everyone. Not everyone can actually receive those. Depends on the situation. There's differences between renting and owning. And so, most times people that own the land can actually apply for the subsidy. And oftentimes they're families that may have bigger operations that get a certain subsidy that maybe a black farmer who may have a similar size is not getting the subsidy. So then it becomes generational that this subsidy comes in. And there's a wonder as to why, this particular operation becomes bigger and bigger. Maybe it's because farmers as neighbors are actually going into business together, or if they're going to sell, their huge operation, they won't post it. They'll say, okay, hey, Jim, you live next to me. We sort of have.
Well, plus they kind of learn the system, don't they?
They learn. It's a system.
Yeah.
It's a system that has government sort of in the middle, sort of as the main arbiter, and then it has these tentacles that goes out to subsidy, and you're working with FSA and NRCS, and so there's an additional safety net, for these various areas in which they can become sustained, and then some people get into solar, and then that's another subsidy, and then even though you have urban sprawl that's happening in the rural areas, even more so now. There's a level of income that could be, whether it's rental income. You're starting to see a lot more farms being sold, and those farms being converted into condos and mega apartments and homes. And I always think that someone always has a price. Maybe they'll say, I'll never sell, but then a year later they come by and the price happens to be just right, given the situation or the condition of the market, or just what's going on right now with the tariffs, and how the tariffs may be affecting farmers, in this short period that's happening right now.
Yeah. Well, on the tariff front, 80% of the grass-fed beef in this country is imported in, and a lot of it from Australia. So I look at that and I'm like, well, okay, as long as we can go both ways here. We can export and we can import. I believe in that free market, but if it can come in tariff-free, but we can't export out, that puts us at Thousand Hills in a tough spot, because we have to compete with Australian beef, and even though it travels halfway around the world, it's still several dollars a pound cheaper landed than what we can produce it for, primarily because of the cost of land and the cost of labor. To do that type of agriculture, they can do it more efficiently in Australia, or cheaper than we can, but here we're focused on rebuilding land in this country by using ruminants as a tool to do it, rebuild soil and habitat and other things, other benefits. So it does feel like we've got an arm tied behind our back in trying to compete in that market. So kind of selfishly, I look at it and go, oh, okay, what maybe we should have a tariff on that product to at least level it somewhat closer to what we could produce it for in this country. So I don't mind competing, but it's it's difficult, especially when you're trying to fix the food system.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of what's happening, with the president right now. When you're thinking about tariffs and 90-day pause on everything, while they're working on it, minus things that are happening in China, because I think he's trying to reset the table, and resetting the table by putting American agriculture, American goods and services first, so that it's not America last, is an ideology, but it's sort of in that way of short-term pain for long-term gain, so that we could have tariff-free relationships with various countries on agriculture goods.
Yeah.
And so, and that's the whole thing about, trying to educate, especially in people that are not as news savvy as you have to be these days, to be able to kind of understand the complexity of what a tariff does and what it benefit and also deficit.
Yeah. It can work both ways.
It can work
This
both
depends
ways.
on how that tool is used.
That's right.
And what the other country's doing. We're not doing it in a vacuum. It's heavily dependent on what they're doing too.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if we can figure out that relationship so that it is a win-win, because that's what it should be.
Yeah.
So I'd like to broaden it out a little bit on food in this country. We produce a lot of soy and a lot of corn, like you said, in the state, 8 million bushels. I think there's around 100 million acres producing corn in the country, and somewhat less than that on soy, but still a big number. and a lot of the soy goes to China.
Yeah.
So when I sit and think about that, I'm like, okay, so we're building a monoculture crop of soy, and a lot of that's going to China. And while that export helps the American farmer, wouldn't we be better off to produce more food that we can actually consume and keep it in this country, produce the food in this country, keep it? Now, of course, we can't produce all the fruits and vegetables. We got to get something from St. Thomas so we can, it's climate.
Because of the region and the climate.
Yeah. But beyond that, whether it's different proteins in animals or other types of food, it just seems like we're designating so much of our farmland to corn and soy. And what are we really consuming as consumers in this country that's made up of corn and soy? Couldn't it be better if it was more diverse and wouldn't we be more resilient if we were more diverse? And then couldn't the government play a role either by backing off of incentives that are there now or introducing new programs that would encourage that diversity of food crop with an eye towards regenerating the land that's degraded? And how do we help in that process? I'd like to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you're looking at it globally, we do not focus if you're looking at a pyramid, we don't put agriculture at the very top. Say like Venezuela or other countries that actually say this is the top. This is the most important way to sustain not only our farmers but also sustain.
That's a great point. Yeah, we don't as a society we don't we value technology, like Silicon Valley, big value, a lot of reward in Silicon Valley, right? For that type of, we don't do that with food. No agriculture, right? Is that what you're saying?
We don't do that with food, and we don't do a really good job. And this is just my opinion, but I don't think we do a really good job in actually telling the ag story as if it was an iPhone commercial.
Right.
How 30 seconds, they do the new iPhone, 17's coming out. You're like, what?
Well, that's super sexy. Look at that thing.
Got that.
Yeah.
And it folds and everything, and you can use all type of different types of technology. And after those 30 minutes, even though you still have the box, you're like, I think I'm gonna take mine back and get this other phone just because of what it can do.
Yeah.
I wish that was the way that we talked about agriculture, collectively. But we have so many industries out there that there's some that say, well, I don't even need to advertise.
Right.
Or I don't want to advertise. And I think that other countries that actually put agriculture at the top, they do a really good job in being able to talk about agriculture all the way through, whether it's fuel or educating people about different indigenous crops, and really educating their citizenry on the different things that agriculture is tied to everything.
Yeah. Well, historically, you think about that just compared to Europe.
Yeah.
When you say agriculture, isn't that really a reflection of the consumer and how they view food? Like in Europe, food is an experience, and food is to be protected, and food is to be medicine. And, there's this whole idea around food. And if I juxtapose that to what in this country, food, we're really spoiled by cheap food. And then food really wasn't an experience. Food was just something you did to fuel yourself to keep working. It was filled a void. But we haven't really placed food as a really vital component of our health, our economy, our life. Right? We've had other priorities than food, and I'm envious of those cultures that actually say no, food is central and really important, and we should
to everyday
to
life.
Everything. Yeah. And how do we protect that? And how do we, to your point, how do we build that mindset so that we are really recognizing there's a difference in different types of food, There's a difference in nutrition. There's a difference in how it was grown, the practices. There's differences. It all isn't just cheap food. We want cheap food. We want it over here, and we're going to look the other way as to what role does that play in our lives and our society, right? How do we take that and go, oh, no, it's much, much more than that.
Yeah.
We have so much, it seems like we have so much runway there to improve as a society.
And that was a great, imagery in terms of food being the central thing when you're out in Europe. But it's even bigger than that, where you have more public buy-in. Mm-hmm. Even if someone is not in the food space, they know not to litter. Right. When you go out there, you don't see, if any, trash on the ground, and if there is any, just people in general will actually pick that up and throw it in the garbage, because it becomes part of a social norm.
Yes,
I want to be able to beautify, my place as well.
Yeah,
and you're right, that food becomes an experience, because farmers are valued at a different in a different way.
Yeah.
When it comes to, this came from so and so, Hans farm. Yeah. Actually produced these cabbages, and they say, oh my God, I can't wait to touch that.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's sort of this, in a way, there's sort of a disconnect, because not everyone is privy to what's happening even 10 miles outside of the radius of their address. And so they may not know that the food that they're eating is locally grown.
Yeah.
Or they might not know who the farmer is.
Or that it was imported 8,000 miles away.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. They say, these fish and chips taste amazing. Yeah. But if you never taste fresh fish versus frozen, right, you don't know the difference.
Right.
And so you just think all fish is the same, and it's not the same. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that's also the beauty of being able to actually see food across the world as a way of educating people about what you're sort of intaking, and sort of looking at all types of regenerative farmers, and how, the level of innovation that has to go into producing the food so that it goes from farm to table. Yeah. In a way that, is palatable for people to understand. Oh, so this is farm to table. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And understanding the practices, and, and I see this, I see this with younger people, that food is more of an experience. When I look at my sons and daughters and their friends, they are much more discerning about their food than I was at their age. Yeah. I didn't give it a second thought. I just knew if I was going to go to class, I needed to eat. I didn't really care what I ate. I just needed to eat. Yeah. And, I didn't have social events or parties that were centered on food. Food was the afterthought. You were doing something else and you happened to eat. So that I see that enlightenment kind of happening around what is food, what is it for my body, what is it for our society, what is it for our environment, and answering those questions and challenging people to ask those questions of themselves. Like, really, you are affecting a lot in your food choices. Right. You're affecting a lot. It's like I said, it's everything from your own nutrition to environment to whatever. And I how do we raise that consciousness?
I think it sort of has to be industry by industry. This big issue right now on sustainable aviation fuel. I thought this was sort of a great way for, sort of the airline industry to sort of look at agriculture in a different light. And this is what, that is exactly what they're doing. But even as far down when anyone is going to buy a car, any car that's not electric, and they say they never taught them about, you need to put 87 or 93 or whatever the octane happens to be. But then they never talk about, 88, that you can still use 88, right, which is still E15. But at the same time, we never talk about that there's also, up to 10% ethanol that comes from corn that's in the actual fuel blend, and some people are like, I don't care. I just want to make sure that, the car just goes as fast as I want it to go. and that's fine. But I don't think we do, just a really job in which it follows through to say, your food is grown in this part of the state, then it has to go here, and then it goes to your,
It goes to processing, it goes to packaging,
that's right,
distribution on the shelf.
So when you say, support local, what does that really mean to people?
That's tough. That's really tough. Local, really. I mean, I really don't even say it anymore. Local, because it depends on the product. Some things just can't be local. Some things can be. Local doesn't mean good necessary. It just means close.
That's true.
So there's so much more to ask. It's like, even know your farmer, that phrase. Like, well, you can know your farmer. He can be a great guy, or she can be a great girl. You can have, that doesn't mean that you're going to like what they're producing.
Or how they're producing
Or how they're producing it. Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't, so the questions have to go deeper. Okay, so I want to challenge you on something.
Yes.
Do you think it's wise for us to use our soil to make fuel and put it in our gas tanks?
Absolutely.
Why?
That's the beauty about understanding, how amazing the soil is and what it does for not just the crops, but also for the environment. And I think that a lot of ways in which understanding sort of historically, whether it's the levels of different horizons that you see when you sort of dig down into the soil and you see different ash caps and, different things, I think it's really important to be able to understand how to preserve, whether it's runoff or whether you want to, preserve soil just for compaction. I think it's really telling that story. I don't think we do that story enough.
Oh, there's so much we don't know about soil.
Oh, so much.
I mean, all I can say is that I know for sure that it's degraded wherever we've had agriculture, active agriculture, for the past 200 years. But there's so much we don't know.
Oh.
And how, honestly, how we've treated the soil, we felt like it was a limitless resource. Right?
Yeah,
it's not.
In Minnesota, we have 26 million acres. And I would say, 16 of those acres happen to be prime farmland. Mm-hmm. And the other part is non-prime farmland. But we have so much urban sprawl and production that's on the prime farmland, the good soil, that, we're not protecting that as maybe we should. But, that's what you're seeing if you're looking at the whole landscape of like, wow, they just built that farm was just there. They had the best crops, out of that farm. And now that farm is sold.
Oh, it's so sad to see that.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, everyone has their right to do what they want with their land. I'm not going to ever question that. But just from a farmer's perspective, when you know the difference between bad soil and good soil, and soil that's better for raising a crop or not, or maybe it's better for just growing evergreens or a lighter soil like that versus food, and you see great land going away for whatever reason, whatever it is, the development or solar or whatever, it's like, oh my gosh, we could be growing food with that. Yeah. And now we're going to do basically nothing with it. It's gonna hold up a building or whatever it is, whatever.
And actually, you're actually seeing, especially say in the Frogtown area or areas out over in the Rondo neighborhood, you're starting to see a lot of urban farmers that are using those 4x8 boxes, to sort of grow food, just within the neighborhood. But I think that should even go within urban planning.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about, okay, how do we build this building, but build it in such a way that, kids that may not have anything to do, they'll not get in trouble and have to deal with recidivism when it comes to going back and forth to jail. But this would be a way for them to be able to add value to
connect
where they live.
And just connecting to the land. And like you said, connecting early in your life, connect to the land, connect to the food, know how it works a little bit.
That's right.
And then, ideally they aren't 4x8 boxes. They're actually part of the earth.
That's right.
Not soil hauled in, but just a garden that's fenced off for keeping it a garden, and growing food.
This reminded me that last time of being in Germany, in Berlin, the architecture is such that that is built in the mindset in regards to agriculture of what would the population be, say, in 10 years, and how can we in this particular space, be able to, think about the soil, think about what that's going to look like 10 years down the road. How do we use it in a way that's going to be not only good stewards of the land, but also how we're going to make sure that, there's not lots of, have it used for, road construction all the time, but to be able to grow plants and different things that people can actually just use as they're walking by. It's a different type of, mindset that hopefully that we would adopt in the USA, to be able to build agriculture into all types of different types of farming and especially if you think about the urban space.
Well, I think we're spoiled in this country. We have so much land to grow food that we don't force it to happen in urban areas. We're like, that's all it is. That's in flyover country. They got plenty of that. We don't need to do that here. But in those small European countries where space is so important.
Space, energy.
Energy.
Solar.
It's like they're just more efficient. We're kind of fat and lazy.
You go to the hotel and you sort of leave on the AC and
walk
come
out
back.
Dang it. No. All right. So I'd like to, in closing, tell me a couple of things you see happening, whether it's globally or in Minnesota, that gives you hope, like hope for our food system. What directions are we going that gives you hope?
I think just having the conversation about what's happening in the news globally and also locally is also a step in the right direction, where we're talking about tariffs and we're talking about relationships, with different countries, whether it's the USMCA or whether we're looking at how, how the EU and various other countries are starting to say, well, maybe we should reset our relationship so that we're putting farmers in America first in every level, regenerative down to sustainable, or even emerging farmers, wanting to be able, for everyone to be able to have prosperity in all of those different levels. But what's happening on the local level is that, of course, some of our local food purchasing agreement grants that were federal have gone away. Local food for schools and those type of things. But we have impressed, especially for legislature this session, to be able to see if we can duplicate that same funding source, so that the program's success can continue on a local level, and we're not, if that program went away federally, we could still keep that same program locally.
Good.
And so those are, some of the things that we're doing. The town halls with, MFU has been definitely an eye-opening experience for myself. And I know Tom and Andrea also have gone to some of those as well. So just sort of having an awareness of where people are and really just instilling hope that it's not always going to be $8 eggs.
Right.
But looking at, people's situations and instilling hope that, this is hopefully temporary, but trying to see what the USDA is going to do now that they have their presidential appointments already in place. And what is that going to look like? I think the last thing that I would say is the reason why I can smile is that I see hope in a different light. I don't see hope as temporary. I see hope as long lasting. But people have to look at their situations not of today, but of 5 years from now.
Yeah,
10 years from now.
for sure.
So
Yeah.
that they could be able to plan differently
Yeah.
and innovate differently so that they don't have to be reliant if a system happens to go down or they're not having that same funding source to come through, that they are able to still maintain.
Yeah. Based on the market.
Based on the market,
Yeah.
of course. Based on the market, they can innovate and pivot.
Right.
And that's what, farmers and in the U.S. are so sought after, is because we can do that.
Yeah. Right. We can innovate.
Yeah.
So along those lines, do you see any tangible trends in regenerative and or sustainable? Are you seeing in your geography, are you seeing any traction there? Are things changing? Or are we sitting still? Or what are you kind of anecdotally seeing?
One thing that I do see in Minnesota is that people are really get their hands into different pots.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just, say for instance, I'm just going to stay with, if someone was in the farmer's market and they say, well, this isn't as profitable as, regenerative agriculture over here, that they're able to try it and say, there's something about regenerative that I haven't thought of before, and incorporate that into the same plan and expand it
Into their offering.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So it doesn't have to be just.
So it's an
just one thing.
open-mindedness to try things. I guess that's farmer ingenuity, right?
And I see that there's really no difference between, there are differences, but there's really no difference between an urban farmer and a rural farmer other than geography.
Right.
But the goal is still the same in regards to reaching people.
Yeah.
Where they happen to be. And I see that there's now a crossover.
Yep.
Where urban is actually going into, other spaces around the state and saying, well, I didn't know you could do it that way.
Wow.
And so
That's cool.
The stagnation is something that I don't see.
Okay.
Not in abundance. You see it in pockets, but I think
so there's some vibrancy there.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And I think, some of it happens to be with the grants that we actually have put together, just in general, not because of, the Trump administration coming in, but just in general, just getting the grants out to people and encouraging people to be able to take advantage of other opportunities that might cross their email.
Yep. Try things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, Patrice.
This is the thing.
Yeah. And we're all feeding someone, like that's the commonality. And eating is an emotional experience.
It is. And also, looking at people's, I always tell people the power of your story, can change.
Yes.
Can change one person. But if it can change 2 people, 10 people, keep your story authentic.
Well, you have a great story, Patrice, and I'm so glad you joined us. I mean, from Harlem to Texas to Iowa to Minnesota, and the perspective that you carry, both globally and what's happening in the state, I think is great. It's great to have you as part of our government pushing these things forward for more diversity in people, emerging farmers, and in the crops we produce. Yes. Diversity is good on all those levels, right? Diversity is good in a grassland.
It's diversity of mindset too.
Yes.
It's not always diversity of zip code.
Right. Yeah.
Just to be able to try new things.
Yeah, that's true.
That's right.
Well, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciated you having here, and hopefully you'll come back.
I will always come back.
All right. That sounds great. See
you.
That smile and laugh. It brightens everyone's day. So
that's why the sun's out.
Thanks again.
Thank you.